All right, now that we're recording, I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everyone see the full screen of the state program report? Or do you see my notes pages?
Yes.
I see the full screen, Madison.
Great, thank you. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll be recording this. If you have any questions along the way, we do have some pit stops in the presentation that will allow for asking questions. And I can't see the chat while we're talking here, so I can check the chat later as well once we're all finished. This is, as I mentioned, this is an introduction for the freely associated states who's reporting in the SPR for the first time, but there are some folks here, such as Justin, who've been doing this for a while. And feel free to add any additional insight for those who've used it before. All right. So reporting allotments. The three freely associated states have received an allotment for the first time in 2020, and this is going to be the first time you're reporting it. Our reporting, we're doing this online in the SPR, and it's going to be due on December 30th. And each award for the allotments is 2 years, as you may know. After the first year, you only submit a financial report. And then at the end of the second year, when the grant is completed, you submit a final financial and narrative report. As I mentioned, territories have been doing this for a little while already. And just as a reminder, we still have those Pacific competitive awards from way back in 2019 that we're still giving extensions on to hopefully meet each other in Hawaii one day. Those are not being reported in the SPR. Those are still reported on those paper forms that you're already familiar with. So why do we have this online SPR report? It's a tool for us to capture data, and it allows us to see how these funds are used, who's benefiting from the funds, what activities are happening, and it allows us to sort of standardize all of that data that everyone is submitting across the entire United States, and allows us to compare the data, see who is doing what, and learn from that and share that information. In addition to this webinar, we do have additional resources on our website to help you work through the SPR. We have a general overview and guide. They're all linked here. There's an IMLS program reporting requirements that's required of everyone. And then there's also the system user documentation that's quite extensive. We do also have what we call an SPR sandbox, which is available for you to log in and play around with and practice. If you want to learn the system a little bit better without having to use the real system, we do have a link right there. Everyone should have access to that, but if you have a problem logging into that, let me know and we can make sure we get you set up correctly. So this is where we're going to start jumping into the SPR. First off, just logging in. You all should have your login credentials by this point, and here's the login website here. Some tips: it's best to use Chrome or Firefox, those two browsers to log in. The other ones don't seem to work as well in the SPR. And a really important tip is to make sure you only have it open in one browser. If you have it open in multiple browsers or multiple tabs and have you doing work in multiple tabs at the same time, issues can occur, some things may get deleted, and we obviously don't want that to happen. So make sure you only have it open in one tab at a time. Now, with your login comes specific user roles and credentials. And this graph here, this with columns, it sort of outlines the permissions for each of the user roles. The authorized certifying official, or ACO, there's only one per state. And they have the ability to certify the report once it's all complete. And we'll walk through the certification later on. But there can only be one per state. So that'll also be your chief, your governor, whoever has to approve all of your reports and sign all the important documentation. Then we have the coordinator. I believe most people on this call today are considered the coordinator. You have the ability to add and edit projects and see all the financial information. And you also have the ability to validate the report, which is a really good step to try before certification. And we'll also review that. Then there are two user roles below that are just around project, data entry, and financial management that you can assign to additional staff members if you like. There's also a component for subrecipient accounts. I don't believe a lot of you do sub-granting or subrecipient granting. In case you did, if you wanted to assign someone from that subrecipient to do the reporting in the SPR instead of you doing it, you can assign subrecipient accounts yourself. I won't be walking through that today, but if that's something you're interested in doing, we can talk about that offline. Okay, the next important page in the SPR is the state information page. And the photos here is how you get to the state info. This is super important for your contact information of the name and address of your SLAA, and financial information and contact information. That's super important to keep this up to date, so we know who to contact about different matters around your grant and your reporting. We do have a new field, or an adjusted field per se, in the state information, which is the DUNS field. In the federal government, they're updating this, so DUNS will no longer be needed. It will be a unique entity identifier, or UEI. You may have received information from IMLS around this UEI. Since you're already in sam.gov, you won't have to do anything extra to get a UEI. You'll just be assigned a new one. And if you go into sam.gov now, you likely will see your new UEI. For this year, you can include both your DUNS and UEI. The UEI is optional, but as of April of 2022, so as of next year, we will require the UEI only. So just watch out for that change. Okay, so the first report we're going to talk about is the interim financial report for the FY 2021 award and the ARPA grant together. This is the same process. All of you did interim financial reports last year, and it's the exact same process, but we will review it in its entirety. So for these interim financial reports, as I mentioned, you will be reporting on FY 2021 allotment and the ARPA grant financial data only. It'll be due December 30th, and it covers the first year of the award, which is October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. We need to make sure you use exact monetary figures, no rounding. And as I mentioned, it must be certified by the authorized official. Here's a screenshot of how you would get to that interim financial report. Just under projects and select interim FFR. And here is the top part of that form. The main thing you'll need to do with this top area is where it says that federal grant or other identifying number. That's going to be that federal grant number that's for your grant, that LS number. You'll need to type in both grant numbers, so the 2021 award and the ARPA award number. They'll both fit in the field, to separate them by a comma if you like. The remaining part of that upper, this square here is all information that gets auto-populated from that state info page. Down here at the bottom, you'll just need to select your reporting type, which is annual. And then for basis of accounting, choose what best suits you. Down at the bottom here that's cut off, you'll see the project grant period. That's an auto-filled field as well, so you won't need to worry about that. With this interim financial report, it's good to notice these grayed out boxes. These are fields that are auto-populated and you don't need to fill them out. You can't fill them out. So just these white fields here are the ones you're going to be worried about. Not worried about, but the ones you're going to want to fill in. So for cash receipts, again, you're reporting on the sum of how much you've received in cash from your allotment award and ARPA money. And cash receipts is the amount of funds you've requested and received from IMLS. Cash disbursements is again the amount you've paid out on the cash and the combination of allotment and ARPA, and then that will auto sum here. Under federal expenditures, for the total federal funds authorized, that field will auto populate to the combination of your grant award amounts here. You may not see that initially when you first log into the interim FFR. You may have to log into it, save it, and then come back to it. We found that sometimes you need to go in and resave for things to automatically populate. And then you'll fill out the federal share of expenditures, which is usually the same amount as cash disbursements. And then federal share of liquidated obligations, which is the amount you may have received from IMLS, but you have not yet paid out. And then at the next section, the recipient share, the total recipient share required will only be the 2021 allotment because the ARPA grant did not have any match requirement here. And then for the recipient share of expenditures, you'll just input how much you've spent in match so far. And then for program income, that's usually set at 0. Very few states use program income. And for the purposes of the interim financial report, you can leave all of the indirect expenses boxes blank, and then you'll hit save. Now that you've completed that, you'll need to have your ACO, your authorized official, certify it. And this is the path. We're under projects. You select financial status report, interim FFR, and then they'll certify. Now, just a reminder for your ARPA grants, everyone received a large amount of money from the ARPA program, and we really appreciate all the different ways people are spending those funds. Because that grant has not yet ended, you will not be reporting on any project narratives or ARPA. That'll be for next year. Please be sure that your ARPA funds are used for pandemic response expenses only. People are getting really creative with how they're spending this money, but make sure the narrative of your reporting for ARPA does reflect that it's under the umbrella of pandemic response. All right, does anybody have any questions about the interim FFR? I can't see the chat, but if you want to voice your questions, we can talk about them. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move on. And as always, feel free to think of your questions and we can talk about them later if you want to come back. So now we're going to be talking about the final reporting, your final report for your FY 2020 allotment and the CARES Act grant. And they'll be combined just as you combine the ARPA and the 2021 allotment. So the final reporting it has 3 main components to it. You have your narrative report, and then you have your administrative project, and then the financial report. This report covers the full award period from October 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2021. And as I mentioned, it's for your FY 2020 allotment and the CARES Act grant combined. Once again, you're going to want to use exact figures, no rounding, and it is due by December 30th unless you requested and received an extension. And as with the interim financial report, it must be certified by your authorized official. So we're going to start off with what I would consider to be the meatiest part of the final report, and that's the narrative portion. This is going to be made up of projects. What is a project? It's essentially an activity, a set of discrete, related and interdependent activities carried out to achieve one outcome. And you're going to compile the dollars spent, the people responsible for accomplishing the tasks, where it happened, and for how long it happened. So it's a lot of data that you're going to have to put into these projects. Who managed it? What was the focus of the project? How did you do it? Where did you do it? How much did it cost? If you had partners, who were they? Who benefited from the project? And how well did it go? What are the outcomes of this project? And another way you can see this is by this framework diagram here. You can think of the blue box as sort of the funding you receive from IMLS. And you spend that funding on these individual projects here. So it's broken out into projects. And then from that project, you will need to assign an intent to it, which is a broad area of impact, and we'll go over those intents in a bit. And then within the project, you're going to have activities, and then there'll be different ways you'll need to qualify that activity, and we'll also go over those. So let's start with inputting a project. Under projects, go to list projects, or you can go to add a project directly. Make sure you have the correct fiscal year. It should default to 2020, and hit add project. Once you do that, you'll see this table of contents, and these are all the parts of the project you're going to need to fill out. You're going to have a project title, which sums up the project succinctly and shortly. The state project code is optional. It's not for us. It's really more for your organization. The start and end date will default to the project period dates, but you want to make sure that you're specific around those and that your project takes place within the grant period. And then you'll have an abstract, which will describe what you did in this project. And we really like it to be no longer than around 150 words. One note about when you're reporting on your CARES Act projects. You're going to be doing this all in the same space, so all of your projects will be listed here. We'd like you to differentiate your CARES Act projects by putting CARES Act : at the beginning of the project title, as you can see it here. Also, for the project dates, the CARES Act projects can start no earlier than April 21st, 2020, because that's when you received that award, or that's when CARES Act was enacted. So we'll be looking for those two things when I review your projects. All right, once you complete the title and the abstract, you're going to have to assign the project a goal. All of your goals are already in the SPR, so you'll just select from your dropdown the goals. You can input the project director's information if you like. And then if needed, you can select a grantee. The grantee is when you do like a subrecipient or subgrant. As I mentioned, I don't think a lot of you do subgrants, so this is completely optional. You don't need to fill it out. And then we also have additional materials, which is also optional, but we love to see additional materials in project information. These are documents that you can upload into the system that just can tell a little bit of a better story for your project. They can be photos, they can be a website that you made, a pamphlet, a lesson plan, anything that you think adds to your project or was a part of your project. We really like to see it because we can show them off both internally and it just gives us a better idea of what you all did. Then the next section of the project is the budget. It's very similar to your Pacific budgets, and it's broken down into salaries, consultant fees, travel, supplies and materials, equipment, and services, and then other operational expenses, which are indirect costs. You'll need to put in the amounts, as you can see here, for both LSTA funds and match. And then in the description, you want to describe what those funds were spent on. So if you bought some computers, let's say you bought 3 computers for $2,000 each. So that would go under the supplies and materials. You'd put $6,000 and then in the description, put 3 computers. Now, another note when you're reporting on CARES Act projects, we assume that you spent your CARES Act funds separately from your allotment funds. But if you have a project that has that used both funding sources, that's okay. What you would do is within the budget, differentiate what funds were spent on what. So here in this example here, 12 Wi-Fi extenders were purchased. 3,200 of that dollars were spent with CARES Act funds, and then the remaining was spent on the allotment. So we would like you to differentiate there if you have a project that used both funding grants. Okay, so each project has to be assigned an intent when you fill out the project information. The intent is a broad why of the project. It can only be assigned one intent. The system will only let you choose one intent now. And it's, a general objective. And then those intents correlate to 6 much broader focal areas. This is where things can get confusing. But you have 14 intents to choose from here. And you'll just have to think a little bit about the general why of your project. So you'll look at these intents here in the corresponding focal areas. And I'll go through them kind of quickly. If you have questions about what some of these intents mean, you can send me an email. But we have things around, providing trainings for patrons, around maybe formal education courses or general knowledge. Information access could be providing computers or obtaining databases just for general information resources for your patrons. Then we have institutional capacity, which is around the library workforce and your staff. If you're doing trainings for your staff and providing things for library operations, you want to include them in one of these intents. And then we have employment and economic development, which is around business resources or job seeking resources for your patrons. Then we have human services, which is around training or resources for helping your patrons with finances or health and wellness or family resources. And then we have civic engagement, which is around how folks can participate in their community or bring people together. These are all very broad, and I ask you just to interpret them how it's up to you on how you want to assign these to your projects. So again, you can only choose one intent per project. And if you find that you have a project that you feel needs multiple intents, you may want to break up that project into smaller projects around that one intent. So now we're going to get into the activities of the project. Each project needs to have at least one activity. And that's sort of, you have this thing of what you want to do. How do you get it done? To assign an activity, it needs to account for at least 10% of the total project. But you can't have more than 10 activities per project. If you're finding you have more than 10 activities, then see if you can consolidate those activities or maybe split it up into multiple projects. We do have these activity types that you'll need to assign to your activity when you create it. There's instruction, content, planning and evaluation, and then procurement. And we'll go into these a little bit more depth in a moment. But to create the activity within the project, you'll see this activities box, and you'll just select the add activity orange button there. And you can see in this example, an existing activity here, and these icons here indicate you can duplicate the activity, edit the activity, which is that pencil, or trash it and delete it, which is that little trash can there. So when you input the activity, you'll have the title, and then you'll want to write an abstract for that activity. And make sure that your title and abstract here are more specific than your general project title and abstract. You're getting a little more specific in this information, or what you specifically did for this activity. You'll assign it the intent, which you really only have one to choose from. And then this is this general activity information, the type, which we talked about, and then that will trigger different modes to select and formats to select. You also have this quantity information that you may need, it may prompt you to fill out in terms of how long a session was, the number of folks attended, the number of times you administered it. So be ready for that. But I'm going to review with you right now the different activities to choose from and what modes will prompt you from those. So a mode is the characteristic of an activity. And as I mentioned, there are multiple ones to choose one. So if you choose instruction, these are the modes. There's a program, which is more of like a class, a training. Then you have a presentation. They call that passive user engagement. So if someone's just presenting on something with no questions or anything, like an author talk maybe. And then a consultation, which is like an interaction with experts for reference services. Then there's the content mode. There's acquisition, which involves around like maybe purchasing library materials, software or hardware. Then there's content creation. That could be making new things, digitizing documents, you're creating content there. Content description, which is cataloging materials. Lending, which is circulating materials. It'll ask you for numbers around circulation. And then preservation. So if you're doing any preservation work there. The next is planning and evaluation. Retrospective, which is you've done a program and you want to do an evaluation on it, your 5-year evaluation that you are currently working on or your evaluator is working on would be considered this. And then the prospective, which is a future thing, which would be like your 5-year plan that you write. Now the final one, procurement, that will only come up if you choose an institutional capacity intent. So if you're acquiring things for the capacity of your library, for your staff, for the general infrastructure, this will be the one you choose. If you're purchasing other things, it would fall back into that content acquisition. Now, the other activity areas that you'll need to consider when you're submitting your report are including partners, if you have any. It'll ask you to choose beneficiaries, like who benefited from your project. Is it the library workforce? Is it the general population of where you live? Or is it a targeted population like young kids, that sort of thing? Most of your projects are going to be statewide, I would imagine. But if there are specific locations you want to include in your information, you can say it's not statewide and then put in those locales. Now we have within these activities, activity outcomes. These are they're very specific towards the activities that you have. And we have designated questions from our research team at IMLS to survey the folks involved in those activities. Having these surveys requires a lot of planning before putting this information into the SPR. So you'll have to think a little bit more ahead when you're developing your projects. As I mentioned, it's at the activity level. And it's really to survey folks participating in specific activities to know what the outcomes are, obviously. We do have a reference sheet. The link is down here. But mainly, depending on how you structure your activities, the system will prompt you for these outcome survey information. And it's according to the activity type here, and the beneficiary of that. And the areas in the orange boxes are when the system will prompt you for these outcomes. And you can see here, the screenshot up top in the SPR. If you choose, let's say, an instruction activity with a library workforce beneficiary, that's going to prompt this orange button. If you choose, let's say, a procurement and library workforce, the outcomes button is going to stay gray, and you won't need to put these activity outcomes in the SPR. So as I mentioned, it takes a little bit more planning in advance to get these surveys out, because you need to survey the folks involved with the activity at the time you're doing the activity. As I mentioned, the orange buttons will prompt you. If you haven't done any surveys for your 2020 projects, that's okay. You can work on looking at your projects for next year and seeing if you need to survey any folks who are involved in a specific activity you're funding. But we do also ask you that any projects involving children, we do not want children or anyone under the age of 18 surveyed. So if you go back, I think we do have an example coming up, but if you have like a general public instruction, let's say you have a story time for younger kids, you do not need to have them surveyed. This is just an example of what that outcome survey looks like in the SPR. If you click on that orange button, it'll ask you to put the survey response options in these areas. I don't have a screenshot of the survey templates, but we do have templates that you can use on our website. And these are links to those where it's those different types of orange areas that prompt a survey. So public instruction, library workforce instruction, library workforce content, and then evaluation for library workforce. Yeah, and here are some example scenarios. So a workshop for adults on learning computer skills. It's a program instruction, and the beneficiary is the general public. So that will put you in the orange area for survey. And again, summer reading manuals for library staff. It's content acquisition, and the beneficiary is the library workforce. And again, it's in the orange area. So if you were doing a manual for the general public content, you would not have to survey them on that manual. All right, now that you've completed activities, there are general project outcomes. These are required for all projects, and it tells the story and the lessons learned of your project. So what were things that you noticed in your project, things that resulted from it, and maybe some significant facets or things that you find were most helpful knowing after the project. And also we ask you if you intend to continue the project in the future. So please do fill that out for every project. All right, once the project is completed, it's still in draft status, so you'll need to change the project status from draft to completed. The easiest way to do that is in your list projects area. You can just select them all and do a batch project status change to completed. Okay, that was a lot of information. Do we have any questions around projects and narrative reporting? Are we doing on time? All right, I'm going to move on to the administrative project. So the administrative project is where you will report on your administrative expenses for your awards. And again, this is the combined CARES Act and 2020 allotment. For each of those, there was a 4% administrative a cap on administrative expenses. And it's totally optional to spend on the administrative expenses, but even if you didn't spend any money, you still need to fill out the report. To get there, you would just go to Projects, Administrative Project, and enter, the title is auto-filled. The intent is auto-filled. Your name as a grantee is auto-filled. The start date and the end date should generally autofill to the dates of the grant period. And then you would just fill out the budget information of what administrative expenses you had, the same as a project for the amounts and the description. And then you would hit save, and that would complete that. And this is just a reminder that you can use up to 4%. It is an option, you don't have to. And just for this year, it is for both the FY20 and CARES. Now, the match section of the administrative project is not subject, since it's your own funding, that's not subject to the 4%, just the LSTA funding part of it. Questions on the administrative project? Okay, I'll move on. So now we're on the final financial status report. It's a little bit similar to the interim financial report. So I'll be repeating myself a little bit. The FSR data should be entered for the full award period, that full 2-year period. And it will correspond to the project information you just filled out. So when we filled in all of that budget information in those projects, that information will roll up and auto-populate into the FSR. So a lot of the work here is done for you. We do recommend doing this last out of all the projects, because you do need to go into the final financial report and save it for all of the information in the projects to auto-populate. So to get there, under projects, hit financial status report and click on final. And the biggest thing you'll need to do here is, once again, enter both grant numbers. So you'll have your 2020 allotment and CARES Act. It can be separated by a comma, a slash, a semicolon, whatnot. And then you'll notice that the total federal funds authorized will be the sum of both those awards. Again, you may not see it right away. So if you go into it and save it, it will then roll up and everything will auto-populate. The fields you do need to enter in for your financial status, your final financial status report. The maintenance of effort requirement, you'll need to enter how much you contributed to your maintenance of effort, or MOE. This is for the freely associated states only. We established your MOE amount last year. If you don't recall what that is, let me know and we can work with you on that. The MOE required will be auto-populated. All recipient outlays not previously reported is typically 0. Unliquidated obligations should also be 0, since it's at the end of the grant period. And then your LSTA administrative costs will auto-populate from that administrative project that you just filled out. If you see that the math here isn't working, it looks off, again, save it and then go back into it. And that's when things will auto-populate and correct themselves. So you'll still have to go into both of those projects, as I mentioned, to complete them and save the status. And as I mentioned before, once you've done everything, go ahead and go back into the financial status report at the very end of everything to make sure it's capturing all of your changes and all of the extra financial information, and save it and complete it one last time. Now you've essentially completed your reporting. You just need to certify. The first thing you can try to do, if you're not the ACO or the certifying official, you can try to validate your report. This is an optional step, but we encourage folks to validate first. because it will show you any errors that may come up that will prevent you from certifying. So just go to Certify Reports and hit Validate Report. If it doesn't give you any error messages, then you're free to certify. Sometimes, as some of you may know, there are error messages that come up. Certain projects may be incomplete, there may be information that wasn't filled out, and the system will flag that and will not let you validate or certify until those are corrected. So you'll have this yellow, this is an egregious one, a pretty bad one. It's usually not this bad for you all. But it'll just give you indicators of what needs to change in order for the project to move forward. And if you ever have questions about the error message, I'm happy to help you decode the error messages. They can be sometimes kind of cryptic. But once that's all resolved, you're able to validate, and then your ACO can move on to certifying. And again, it's a fairly easy step. They'll go into the certify reports under projects, and then with the orange certify button. And you'll know a project is certified when you go into the financial status report, and at the very bottom of it, it'll have their name and the timestamp of when they certified the report. Okay, well, once you certify your report, I get that information and I will take some time to review your report. Sometimes I'll ask you to go back and make some changes. That's very normal. We just want to make sure that everything looks good and is accurate. And once I review it and approve everything, this your report actually goes into a public information database. It's this website here. Basically, all information you submit in a report will show up here, except for budget information and the additional materials I mentioned. But if you want to take a look at it now, you can see past reports from back as far as 2014, excuse me. Okay, does anybody have any questions?
I'm lost.
I do, Madison, as far
Sure.
as administrative expenses or administrative projects.
Sure.
So if you have like expenses on an administrative project that's like, say you get an equipment, say you have a laptop that's covering multiple projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that all go under one? You just report it one time under the administrative project, or?
No, if your the administrative project is for expenses that help you run the LSTA program. So if that was a computer for you, Justin, to help you do the work as an LSTA coordinator, it would go under that. If it's a computer that's contributing to multiple projects, I would probably couch it under one project.
Okay. I guess I was, because it's all for, okay. As coordinating the lista, like as long as the projects are all under the lista, right, and then it's acceptable.
Right.
Okay. Got it.
Any other questions? Okay. We have 10 minutes left.
I have a question.
Sure.
So for the SPR report, we're just going to report the 2020 and the CARES Act.
That's correct. For the narrative reporting. Mm-hmm.
For the narrative. And for the narrative, do I have to fill, there's a form in the SPR that I need to fill out, or does it have to be a separate paper-based report or
You'll be doing that all in the SPR.
all on the
In those
SPR?
in those projects that I showed you. And you should have a login, Mary. If you have trouble logging into the website, which, let me see. The website is right here.
Mhm.
You should be able to log into this and go through the steps that I showed you in the presentation. But if you have trouble logging in, let me know and I can help you with your login.
Yes, I can log in, but I think my the new minister and the coordinator for the grant, I don't think they have the log into the system. So
Okay, I can get them set up in the
for
system.
my access, I cannot validate. I can only add and edit or something, and they're the
Right.
one to validate and certify.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I will. I think you're right. I think we do need to create logins for them. So I'll make a note for that and I'll send you an email.
Okay.
Madison, just one more question, just to be clear on on separating the CARES Act and the 2020 SPR.
Mhm.
So when we were going to report the CARES Act as a project, right? And with the CARES Act :
Exactly.
okay, and that's how
Like
we're going to
this.
separate. Okay, perfect, got it.
Mhm.
Marison,
Yes.
is it possible for you to email us this presentation?
Yes. Everyone will get a copy of the presentation and I'm recording this right now. So everyone, I'll also send the recording.
Okay.
I'm actually going to go ahead and stop recording.